quickly check. There's usually a little delay on YouTube,
Yep.
so just make sure we're live. And we're live. Yes. Okay, so sorry for the slight delay, everyone, but 5 minutes, so I hope you'll understand. We're here today with Maxime Chouinard. Chouinard?
Yep.
Is
Chouinard.
that okay? Perfect.
Yep. That's good.
Close enough.
Yes.
And the topic of the video today, I think, is going to be really interesting and really unusual. It's something that I think is um, a topic that isn't discussed very often. But before we start, Maxime, if you want to give a little bit of introduction to yourself and tell us who you are.
Sure. So, yeah, Maxime Chouinard. I'm Canadian, French Canadian. So I'm from little town called Saint-Laurent-des-Monts, originally in Quebec. I've been involved in swords for now, say more than probably 23 years now. Started the Hema in 2002, and I've been collecting swords for probably was as long, and especially antique swords. Started collecting those about more than 15 years ago now. Been working in the cultural field for also quite a few years. Been a museum curator since 2009. Worked at different museums, and now I'm the supervisor for the national collections at Parks Canada, which is a bit like the National Park Service in the United States. Um, in Europe, I don't know if there's any equivalent where you are. I had a very hard time when I was in France trying to explain what Parks Canada is to the Army Museum folks. But they're basically we take care of national parks and including also archaeological sites on crown lands and historical sites that are managed by the federal government. So we take care of all of the collections related to these, and we have quite a few swords as well in those collections.
Okay. So how do swords, how do weapons collections and swords factor in the scope of, let's say, Parks Canada? Because I would imagine, um, my first thought would be that it has to do more with like natural resources and perhaps archaeology. So, what's the connection with swords?
Yeah, well, there's definitely some in our archaeological collections, but so as mentioned, there we also take care of historic sites. So we
Mm.
have I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, but you have quite a few historic forts that we take care of, and also historic houses related to different historical figures. So we have a sizable sword collection that are related to these sites, yeah, military sites
Mm-mm.
foremost, but also coming from personal collections of the folks that live in those different houses. Yeah.
Cool. And is Parks Canada provincial, based, or is it a national? Like, do you work on the national collection?
Yep. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
cool.
federal, so we it's all over the country. We have over 35 million objects.
Wow.
Those are mostly archaeological, but we also deal with so the what we call historical or ethnological, so things related to our historic sites. We have about I think we have about a quarter of a million objects in that collection alone. And we're in the big process of moving it all now to a new locale right here in Gatineau, where I live, around Ottawa.
Nice. Speaking of forts and stuff, when I was a child, I was in Canada. I had relatives there, and I visited Fort York. It was near Toronto. or
Yes.
in the area there. It was a very, very cool experience. They were already well ahead with the like reenactment aspect and the living history. It was just a very cool experience. Probably
Yeah.
informed part of my interest
Yes.
in military history. And speaking of coincidences, you'll might see a different background from usual, and that's because I'm actually in Paris at the moment.
All right.
So yeah, so the Musée de l'Armée is going to be on the list for
Great.
tomorrow, which I
Great.
know. And just yesterday, I happened to see the book you collaborated for, or the catalog exhibit of the on duels.
Yes.
Which yeah, so yeah, it was at the bookshop in the Conciergerie, so it's making its way around
Yes.
the Paris museums.
Great.
But without deviating too much from the topic of today, Irish medieval swords. So, how does this become your interest, or where do you switch from, let's say, uh, 18th, 19th century into such a niche
Yes. So
interest?
the I think most people in the sword collecting world will know me uh, for French swords, and that's fair. I think that's probably one of my most uh, well, the area I'm most involved in. Um, but depending on who you talk, I'm known for different reasons, and one of those is for Irish stick or Batarok.
Mm,
It's a traditional martial art I learned in 2007 in Ireland, and from as far as I know, the only person who still had a living lineage on the island. And what this martial art is it's basically fighting with a shillelagh. With
mm,
it's basically a cudgel walking stick with the um, uh, knob striking hand on the top. And so I've been teaching, researching that for many years, and part of that interest also crossed in with swords because I was curious if could I replicate, could I use the same techniques we I learned from my teacher with the sword, so that would come from
mm,
old um, Irish sword techniques or fighting techniques. So I delve into that interest quite a lot, and the answer is not quite. I think it probably has way more to do with Irish axes, actually, but that might be a topic for
mm,
another day. But with swords, it's a little bit different. But through this, I delve very deeply in the topic of Irish swords and made I think a lot of interesting discoveries along the way because it's a very interesting topic. I think few people really know of, mostly because those Irish medieval swords are extremely rare.
mhm,
There's, to my knowledge, I think there was only one example that was ever sold in the private world
mm.
um, by Churnies in
Yeah.
Italy, and they had no idea what it was when they sold it. But the rest is all, or pretty much mostly all, archaeological finds, and I think a lot of people would imagine that they're the same, just the same as most Western European countries,
Hmm.
but not at all. At least in the later parts of the medieval era, we get some very unique Irish swords, and like most of the Irish warring equipment, it's extremely different what was done elsewhere. So it's a fascinating world, really. So yeah, I it's what got me into this, and it really developed into an interest of its own over the years. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that kind of matches a lot of what we see in general with Ireland history, where its extreme kind of insularity created these very unique, you see it, I think, a lot for versions of like writing, like different calligraphy aspects, and you see it in music, how it probably, well, maybe that, but yeah, it's definitely its own place in many different ways. So if we're talking about Irish swords, what would the quick intro be in terms of like timelines, the need to know facts?
Yes. Well, there's there's it goes fairly far, but there's a period that um, I'm less knowledgeable about. I would say the Bronze Age,
Hmm.
which is very interesting out of its own, on its own, and I think for some reason it's also the probably the most studied era as far as Irish swords go, probably because there's a lot more examples that are found. But the swords that you find are, I would say, and again, I don't want to speak wrongly about these because again, I'm not as knowledgeable about them as for the rest, but I'd say they're a little bit more similar to what you would find in Britain and maybe even in Western Europe around the same time. Uh, Very similar Celtic nations that are evolving around this part of the world. But then with the Iron Age, uh, again you see a development and really what's interesting here is when you look at Irish swords, you see you don't see a very gradual, development as you would see maybe in certain countries. There are some very hard very hard distinctions that get made, and they tend to follow big events, evolutions of the political social world in
Hmm.
Ireland. So you get uh, when the Iron Age starts, you get to see swords that are increasingly more reminiscent of Sparta, Roman, Roman swords, or uh, Gaelic or at least continental Gallic sword you would see
Hmm.
around this time period. So very, very um, even blades, squarish blades that you would again see on the continent this time period, uh, and then it starts to get uh, again it starts to change a lot when the Viking era happens,
Hmm.
and that really shakes up the whole of Irish society for quite a while. When the in the eighth, ninth century, when things are really happening as far as Viking Ireland. So you have Vikings coming to the island and not only pillaging or warring as they would do in other countries, but really settling. And a lot of the major cities in Ireland today, like Galway or even Dublin, were founded
Hmm.
by Vikings.
Hmm.
And so you have these communities that are set up there, and then the equipment and the swords are from then on very much Norse-like. And
Hmm.
so this is also where the X gets introduced. This is what we're told by Gerald of Wales, one of the rare authors that um, tells us that writes about how Irish people fight in that
Hmm.
era, or at least a little bit later. He wrote in the the 13th century. So he made a trip to Ireland to see some of his relatives who had found and settled there during the Anglo-Norman invasion, and he talks briefly about how Irish people fight, and talks about the use of the axe, then saying that they learned this from the Norse and the Danes. So yeah, they adapt quite well your what's it, typical Viking Carolingian swords. And what is typical of Ireland at this time period is that they they also keep those technologies, those styles for much longer than you would see in other countries. And so uh, when they finally kick out the Vikings out of Ireland, famously with through the leadership of Brian Boru, um, they still keep these equipment for surprising surprisingly long amount of time. And so when the Anglo-Norman show up and invade the island around the 13th century, you see uh, these Norman warriors basically fighting their people armed like their ancestors. I don't know if they truly realized it at the time, but they must have felt, at least compared to all the other groups that they would have found until then, they would have probably felt a little bit surprised by what they saw there. Um, and this invasion is also a critical moment in Irish history, obviously, because suddenly Ireland starts to, of course, lose its independence. And so what happens is, uh, at first, the Anglo-Normans have control of most of the island, but then Irish kings, because they're Ireland back then is not one big kingdom. It's broken down and a myriad of smaller kingdoms, which sometimes get united by a high king, but most of the time not. And so some of these Gaelic kingdoms survive, and then namely through the help of Scottish mercenaries called gallowglasses that they bring over from the Hebridean Islands. Um, a lot of them, again, um, descended from Viking settlers. So they bring them over, and they put a halt to the invasion, and over time start to reverse this to the point where uh, the English crown and Anglo-Norman lords start to lose almost total control over the island, except for the region around Dublin, which is called the Pale. So when you'll hear the expression "beyond the Pale," it's usually where it comes from. And what's interesting as far as swords is that at this time, and you start to see very clear Scottish styles appearing on the island. So you see, I don't know if I can share pictures with you.
Yes,
This,
absolutely. There's, I think you should have the option yourself. If do you see on the panel the present?
yes.
Yeah, so
Okay,
through there
great.
you should be able to.
Let's try that. Because I think with my hands I can quite can quite do justice to to these swords. So let's see. Quite a few here to show, so I think people will appreciate that. So let's see if we got a good example here. Oh, we got here.
Yes.
Make this work. Okay,
So there we go.
great. So so this is one. So this is from Logara in Ireland. So as I said, all of these swords really are archaeological finds. Lots of them found in lakes rivers and sometimes bugs. Um, this one, as I was saying, very typical of Scottish swords. And what starts to happen as well here is a switch towards very front weighted swords in Irish warfare. Um, and what many people don't realize when they look at these swords is that most of them will have very small pommels, and as you can see in this case, hollow pommels, and
Mm-hmm.
even sometimes small wooden pommels.
Oh.
Even so, to say almost no pommel really, because it's mostly just a continuation of the grip. And so it definitely, at least for the Gaelic Irish, you start to see this clear preference for very forward weighted weapons that continues with axes. Axes are very popular right up to the end of the 17th century, and of course cudgels, shillelaghs, also very
Mm-hmm.
forward weighted, and the swords, of course, with those very uh, cut centric forward weighted um, uh, dimensions. So see if I can share a different one here. Let's see. So
And a question that comes to mind here is you mentioned, let's say, the martial art aspect. Let me turn it at this is related to axe use in a sense, so the forward heavy. So this seems to inform the whole fighting style in Ireland, including swords. Is there like, do you feel there's a common, let's say, ancestry in the axe, even for the sword, or is there another reason why swords were forward heavy? And like, do we know?
I think it's just a I think it was well adapted to the type of warfare that was occurring
Mm,
in Ireland. So I'll actually so this is another picture of some of these sword types that you see, and some of the authors that wrote about these are also mentioning that for some of those that are missing the pommels, there's a possibility that the pommels were actually wooden.
mhm.
Even for those two-enders here, you would see also probably wooden pommels on them. But let me just find back another one of these
It
pictures
seems like the
here.
second one in the picture there still has a bent peen, almost like you see on some nimchas, where
Yes,
the it's simply overlapping the. It's
yes. So
interesting.
I don't know if you saw. There's a blog. This gentleman called Robert. Actually, get it. Bring one of these books here. Robert Gresh wrote this great book on which I'll talk about in a few,
Hmm.
but on the skiing, the Irish skiing, and also I think wrote a more recent book that I still haven't gotten my hands on, but on Irish warriors on the Cairns, if I remember
Hmm.
correctly. Uh, but well, I guess I could probably use actually the image here from his cover. But so what you see here are probably some of the most common warriors in Ireland at this time. At least this is from the early 16th century, but it would have probably been quite similar in as far as equipment in earlier periods. Um, so they're called kerns. They're
Hmm.
usually considered like the light infantry, as you will
Hmm.
in Ireland, and so they are. Here, I'll share this other image here. Uh, so they're the ones that are mostly associated with the one-ended swords, while the gallo glasses are the heavy infantry, so the ones holding up the line. And so, but you'll have most people at this time wearing fairly, even right by the 16th century, wearing fairly light or even no armor,
Mhm.
at least in European standards. So the Kerns, especially, which would have been the most numerous warriors on the battlefield, um, were very lightly equipped for the time. The so you see the if I can just uh, find back the image here. Um, there you go. So this is from an image from the 16th century.
Oh,
Again,
I don't think we're seeing
oh,
it.
don't see it.
Uh,
Sorry. Mm, mm,
because usually when they're uploaded, I see them here in the control panel, but I'm not seeing
mm.
anyone. Ah, there we go. Yes,
Okay.
this one.
All right. Great. So as they are so calling them wild Irish. Sometimes
Hmm.
the term they would use for those Irish people living in beyond the Pale and outside of the
Mm-mm.
Anglo-Norman Lord influence. So you can see him carrying a different type of sword, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, the warfare around this time in Ireland is very much centered on raids and ambushes, and probably one of the most common types of raids is called cattle raids, and
Mm-hmm.
as you'd imagine, it's centered on the acquisition of cattle. So which was a very precious resource in Ireland at the time. So basically, we get some descriptions of how things went, and uh, usually you'd have the Kerns showing up, and they would fight very much with darts. So throwing darts were a major element of war uh, in uh,
Mm-hmm.
in Ireland at this time. Um, they were, and again, I'll try to um, share an image with
Would
you.
these have been similar to like the Roman darts?
Well, it so it's interesting you mentioned because there's I think an interesting similarity uh,
Mm.
here, maybe to now I can quite remember the name exactly of the Roman
Me neither. That's why.
dart throwers, but anyway, there's maybe this continuation, or maybe it's a parallel development in a way of this type of warfare. No, we don't quite know for sure,
Mm.
um, but uh, and I'll share the image and it'll make it a lot clearer, I think. Let's see here.
And in the meantime, I'll just invite anyone who has questions to, like, as usual, feel free to add them into the chat as we go. And
There you go.
here's the image we're talking about.
So this one, so you can see the warrior, of course, on the right, having this dart ready to throw. So with this finger loop, um,
Mm.
but also so carrying a sword, and on the left arm carrying this gauntlet. And I'll just share another picture because this one I think is a bit of a fanciful rendition of that
Mm-hmm.
that gauntlet. But the more common one we see, and let's see if it will share it.
This is such an interesting. Ah, yes, here we go. Uh,
So
this one.
there you go. Yes.
Yes.
So so right at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it around the
Mm-hmm.
the right guy's feet. You can see this gauntlet that's actually very interestingly hanging out around his feet. So hanging out around his neck. Uh,
Mm-mm.
So this is always showed as being worn on the left arm, and so we know that they're dart throwers, and we also see them often with the sword not in the belt, not in some sort of a bandolier, or but really held in their left hands as well.
Mm.
Um, and so there's been lots of theories about why exactly, because it's oftentimes the one of the only armor piece of armor that they'll wear.
Mm.
Sometimes you'll see a helmet, again, like the guy on the left, um, but you'll almost never see shoes, for example, and very little to nothing as far as body protection. So this is, and it's a very heavy kind of arm protection as well. So there's been a lot of theories about why this is worn, how this is used, and my personal theory about this is that it's related to the dart throwing. That
Mm-hmm.
so if you're a dart thrower, basically your job is not to get in there with the gallo glasses and fight it out, be a bit of a suicidal idea. So what you're doing is you're standing outside, and usually during those cattle raids, so you would start throwing darts at the enemy, and then the gallo glasses would come in, form a line, they would fight probably the other people's gallo glasses in a line, try to keep people away and try to gain access to the precious cattle, so you could the currents could then get in, maybe with also as well the help of the the Irish noblemen, were usually the cavalry,
Mm-hmm.
and round up those cattle. And so if you're throwing those darts, and then suddenly an enemy comes towards you, so you do have your sword, hopefully ready to be taken out. But if you're holding these darts on your left hand, and then you have this left hand protected by
Mm-hmm.
your gauntlet, you can now use the darts and the gauntlet as a makeshift shield, as a
Mm-hmm.
bit like you would see in some African countries today, namely in South Africa. With, I don't know if you ever saw Zulu fighting, where
No.
they'll usually have well, throwing uh, darts or throwing spears basically in their left hand, and they'll have a club in the right, which when things get serious would usually be an axe, and they have also a small shield, small
Mm-hmm.
buckler that goes on their left hand, and so this way they can use the spears with the buckler as a shield. So the darts allow a much wider protection around you.
Mm-hmm.
So my belief is that it was probably used the same way, and you can see again which the name would come back to me. Is it Astartes? Anyway, the Roman dart throwers.
I can look it
Also,
up in the meantime.
but you also see those with in ancient Greece, and you even see those, if I remember right, with Persian soldiers. And you can see some very similar depiction where these soldiers will have these shields, uh, and holding their darts again with the left. And so I believe again increasing the protection. And you even see this. There's one illustration from France from the 15th century, showing two dart throwers, and one of the dart throwers has these darts again on his left hand with a small buckler.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you were surprised, this made for very nice protection. You could defend yourself and attack with the sword, while hopefully you were relieved by some reinforcements, or
Mm-hmm.
pushed away the incoming enemy, or managed to retreat, which was usually again the way that the Kerns would do war, and this is why they're very lightly equipped. And we believe that's even the reason why they don't have shoes, because you want to be able to quickly come in and come out, and to the very much the frustration of the English whenever they would attempt invasions is they would not be used to this type of fighting. They would be
Exactly.
ambushed everywhere in very thick forests, which were becoming almost unknown in most of Europe at the time, and so not wearing very much equipment, they could zoom in and out, and as we believe with the shoes, so Ireland being very humid, very boggy country, if you're trying to run around with shoes on, either you would
Mm.
quickly lose them or they would become tiny water buckets around your feet.
Yep.
So probably in time, people decided, well, maybe it's just better to go barefoot, and
I
even
think
wear wear much of any pants. Um,
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here from what you've shown in the images and what you've mentioned so far is there's almost a mix of really ancient and almost universal forms of combat. So there's like this uh, adapting to the nature of the landscape in a sense and really developing through that. But also the javelin you showed with the loop reminds me a lot of like the atlatl. So like getting that leverage on the throw, which again is a weapon that you see everywhere and goes back to thousands of years. But then on the other hand, there's also like you mentioned a pretty modern strategy, like specialized troops. Everyone has their own function in combat, even though it's a specific kind of combat, let's say that relates to cattle raiding or stuff.
mm,
So it just sounds to me as you talk that there's this really interesting like double face to Irish fighting, where there's like these really long wave elements that blend into something
uh,
more modern and more
and
specialized.
it's very. Oh, sorry, cut off a little bit there. Um, so you were saying very specialized
Yeah, just like this
techniques.
mix
Yes,
of specialized and really ancient and timeless kind of techniques. And it sounds very unique as a blend, let's say. So, do
yes,
you have
and
an idea of what the causes may be?
well, I think it was really suited for the type of warfare that was going on. And again, I don't know if this is a continuation of some older ways of fighting that were common in all over Europe before, or if this just kind of a parallel development because it made sense to fight this way. You know, do we have if you
Hmm.
have very thick forests, at least, you know, uh, I've actually looked a little bit at this, that the forests in Ireland at the time they go up and down, but by the 16th century they're fairly developed. But as far as Europe goes, so I'm in Canada. For me,
Hmm.
it's even at that time period, it's not a very thickly forested country for me. But for Europe, it would have been luscious forest, absolutely.
Hmm.
And so you don't have much of a you don't have much of a space to do open warfare. It's often the island at that time is often compared to North America at a
Hmm.
similar time period when the uh, settlers start to arrive. When you have again big forested areas, groups that do war mostly on the basis of raids,
Hmm.
and so again, if you're looking to spring in, steal cattles, or you don't really have much in the way of forts, castles. So the element of surprise arriving on your opponent to invade his territory uh, quickly is very important, or ambushing his troops as they're moving to try and
Hmm.
invade. So you want these lightly armed forces, and they were very successful against the English for a very long time. And interestingly, they started to fail catastrophically when they started to adopt more continental pike formations that they were learning from the Spanish. Were training them at the time, and this probably wasn't the only reason for this, but the Battle of Kinsale and the the Elizabethan period was really the death knell of the Gaelic warriors. And this was a battle where they tried to fight it out with pikes, and fortunately for them, lost to the British forces. But anyway, that's again, is it something that they kept from older times? Maybe, maybe not. I was probably still fairly different from what the Vikings found, for example. So was this later development? We don't really know for sure. But it definitely, I think, influenced the swords. Again, because if you don't have a lot of armor, and if warriors around you is the most heavily armored warriors are your gallows glasses, and I'll try to share
We
our
have them
image
here.
So there's so on the right side, it's a stone carving from I think this is from the early 16th century or maybe late 15. But this is you see a yellow glass warrior on the right side accompanying an Irish lord. So they were oftentimes in the retinue of Irish lords. So they were paid most of the time, although in later times they started to become their own families. But they would mostly be mercenaries, and they would be the ones, as you see here, that is wearing this chainmail going down below his knees with this akiton, this padded armor underneath. Of course, conical helmets. So the kit that he's wearing there wouldn't have seemed out of place in the Norman period. But by the 16th century, it's very much an antique looking kit. And you can see him also with his Spartax at the time in his left, and of course his sword, which is starting here to be again evolving into a different kind of sword. So by the as I was saying before, by the end of the Anglo-Norman period, now you see these Anglo-Norman pockets are becoming more and more estranged from the British Crown, and the British are complaining that they are becoming more Irish than the Irish themselves, famously. Even though they're still quite a bit of a difference in how they even the equipment they wore, but the island is now mostly ruled by those pockets of Anglo-Norman lords, and mostly also by now the Gaelic kings and lords that are have regained this power and influence. And you see another type of sword that appears, and now we get into the truly unique swords from Ireland. So these are let's see if
Well, so in the meantime, while you upload the image of that, we have a couple of comments here by
yes.
Irish Medieval History. So speaking still of the bare feet and guerrilla kind of technique, he once said that as we didn't have rubber soles until the 20th century, and having done martial arts in 16th century shoes, ground is definitely very slippery in Ireland,
Yes.
and it's a very difficult terrain. And he then adds this point of disagreement with what you mentioned on the pike combat, that Irish have beaten the English in the majority of pike and shoot battles. My knowledge of this is very limited, so I'll sit this one out.
Yes, I think they definitely had success, but in the end, I guess it's necessarily the number of battles you win, but it's the importance of them, and in the end, the ones they did lose ended up, unfortunately becoming the more important ones, at least in their cause. But yeah, it's a good point that they didn't lose all of them, and probably the or probably a useful development as well to include pikes and shot in their repertoire, if only for a short period at least.
And it seems to me like, in what you're saying now, before we dive into some sort of typologies I see you have there, but um, the Irish seem to, there's kind of these waves, right? They get in contact with a group of people, but then they kind of are isolated enough that they're able to develop their own. So it's kind of, you have the Vikings arriving, but then being absorbed in a sense, or the Irish identity or fighting identity developing. Then you have the English, but even they kind of uh, become Irish or become separate from the. Do you
Yeah,
think this is? Oh,
and sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just wondering if you think this is also fact, like this kind of the strength of being isolated, which in a way works also for England, on the other hand, like this separation from the continent, and then Ireland is even more removed in a sense, is a must be a big influence in both the uniqueness of the weapons or armor, but also in the fact that we keep seeing this use of weapons that the rest of the Europe was using way earlier, and they're still in use instead on the island.
Yes, and there's always these. Like I was gonna say, I don't know if seems that picture is not.
Oh, I think yeah,
Or
there we
maybe if
go.
it's okay. So okay.
Yes.
So this is what some authors have named Type 3 Irish swords, or but this is more commonly known as the Irish ring pommel swords.
Hmm.
And so this is very much a unique type of sword. So up until then, you have, say, you have these very Scottish type, you have these very Norse type of swords that are used, and but then you have this very unique type of a sword that appears, and you can see a few examples here from Irish museums. So they are characterized by these obviously these ring pommels um,
Hmm.
that are try to show a closer picture here. So this is another example. So you can see the ring pommel here in the end. Um, Again, very light pommels, and talk about this again more. But um, so and these very, as I would call it, almost bow tie kind of
Hmm.
guards, oftentimes in an S shape, as you can see on the bottom here. And in a lot of the times, in the vast majority, at least with the one-ended blades, you see them with Type 19 blades. And because of these these blades, earlier authors were mostly pointing that these swords were appearing in the 16th century.
Hmm.
But from what we know now of some of the early examples of Type 19 swords, it seems that they actually appeared a lot earlier than the
Mm.
16th century, even by the early 15th century, even if not earlier. And there is another example here that I found in the British Museum. So this is a sword that's in the British Museum collection that is identified as Irish. Um,
Hmm.
and what's interesting is this. So this was donated by this 19th century by this Irish art collector of archaeological finds, and it was found in Ireland. Fortunately, I don't think it's properly documented like most 19th century finds.
Mhm.
But what's really interesting is that there's this Type 19 sword and bow tie kind of guard, but has this pommel that's not, in this case, not really a ring pommel. It's more of a hollow wheel pommel.
Mhm.
And there's speculations that this is partly where the idea came from these wheel pommels that were in fact hollow, and
Mhm.
so true, through their own preference, imagination, Irish warriors started to design them simply as circles, as rings, um, and it's very important to understand that by that time that these blades are imported. There's different commercial routes
Mhm.
that do reach Ireland at this time, namely from around coastal Spain, coastal France, but also making their way from the continent and across, coming from Venice. And this might have been either through Spain, through Venice, two places where the Type 19 blades
Mhm.
were popular, and also those similar types of hilts. This might have been one way through which these sword style came true. Um, but uh, so but the development itself became very much unique
Mhm.
to Ireland, and the hilts themselves were made by local smiths, uh, and it's a very important aspect to understand. I think we're starting in the sword community to better understand that, because for a while I think a lot of people and even academics had this notion that swords were, if you're a swordsmith, you made swords and you made everything. You made
Mhm.
the hilt, you made the blade, and then you sold it, and that was it. But more and more now we're understanding, because this was a really much a 19th century concept. I have some like Wilkinson swords here, or let's say like
Mhm.
uh, this British
Oh,
cutlass,
wait.
right?
Right.
That it's of course all of it was
Uh,
made.
just a sec. I
Um,
have to get back to you
sure. Okay.
because we still
Oh
have the
yeah.
image on
Oh,
screen.
sure.
There we
But
go. There you are.
yes. So yeah, like showing this cutlass here, right? So this is like in the 19th century of industrial sword making.
Mhm.
You have more and more sword companies that make swords from entirely scabbards, blade, so forth. But in the medieval era, this is extremely unusual, and especially when you're exporting blades, the blade is the thing that's probably the most specialized skill. So not that the hilts are not a complex trade, that complex uh, um, art, but it's the blade quality definitely is a very advanced skill. So this was not something that was common, that was very developed in Ireland, and so
Mhm.
they had to import most of their blades, but they could make hilts. And if you can probably save a lot on shipping. So I don't know how much shipping sword blades would have been back then.
It's a
Probably
bunch
didn't.
of weight for sure.
Yeah, probably came with lots of also legal complexities as we have today. Fortunately, probably more so back then. But it was so it makes sense that if you can make the hilts yourself, why bother to ship the whole thing?
Mhm.
And even in recent times, I've seen academics, even in Irish history, make this mistake. I know there were some theories, for example, about the famous illustration of these gallo glasses and currents
Mhm.
um, from Durer,
Mhm. Yeah.
who is showing us uh, these warriors. Actually, I'll show it if I can find it here. So these warriors that there's debates about, did he illustrate them from life? Did he was he working from somebody else's sketch, or even just a description? It's unclear,
Yeah.
but one theory was that he was working from a description, and because a lot of people are saying, well, there's you see, so these warriors on at least one warrior on the left here has this ring hilt, two-handed sword, and even has this dagger skein. I guess
Hmm.
very not very typical what we find, but this dagger with not quite a ring pommel, but at least a crescent pommel.
Hmm.
Um, these are not necessarily described at the time in what people talk about when they talk about Irish warriors, and you see them in illustrations though. But there weren't many illustrations by. So this is from 1521. By that time, there's really not much that's available on Irish warriors. So people are saying, well, it's uh, if Duer didn't see them, how did he get the idea of these ring
Hmm.
pommels? And some people say, well, he was at the time he was around the Netherlands. The Netherlands were exporting a lot of swords, and well, they might have seen ring hilts around there and just added them. But again, this is coming from the idea that they exported swords ready-made, which is not really the case. And so it's unlikely that he just decided, well, I'll put a ring
Hmm.
hilt on this guy. Looks good. Um, and there were also, people were arguing, well, he also portrays ring hilts in other portraits that he made. And then I debated this idea in the past. I don't think that's the case. I think this is
Hmm.
again people misunderstanding what they're seeing on the image. These are probably just hollow or concave wheel pommels that appear to be ring
Hmm.
hilts. But anyway, I'm digressing here. But this is again very famous illustration. It's probably not entirely accurate. And again, the idea might be that maybe he did this from memory. Maybe he had somebody actually give a very, very good description or had a sketch to work on.
Hmm.
But it's definitely surprisingly accurate, at least for the time, and being one of the first illustrations of Irish warriors, probably mercenaries
Yeah.
serving on the continent as
I find this to be a fascinating image. Just every detail is interesting. Like
yes,
apart from the swords, but one of the guys is wearing what essentially are Birkenstocks, which
yes,
shows that like the design has not really changed too much. And there seems to be a hole in the tip of the sword there,
yeah. I'm not sure what
or
that's.
hmm,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, hole, or is it some sort of engraving?
yeah,
Or did he run out of made a little doodle there at the end?
possible.
It's hard to say, but yeah, like yeah, there, and just the helmets as well
Yes.
have been really again a big subject of debates over the year, because the guy on the second guy from the left has this like lobster,
Mm,
very uh, almost for the time almost futuristic looking element, because it's not something that something you see on the continent a little bit later on, but this is not necessarily in 1521.
mhm,
And what's going on with the helmet on the left is also an interesting question. But you can see that they're still wearing these acton with the like chain mails. like very much like, again, arcing back to Norman era kind of equipment. And then you have the Kerns on the right side, wearing the again, there's debates as to how much their clothes are true to the period, but you have the haircut that is associated with Irish
Mhm.
warriors at the time, the gib, and axes, against part axes, not quite what we find in archaeological finds, but at least the idea, the shape, general shape is there. So yeah, very, very fascinating illustration. And actually have one one
Uh,
example of a ring hilt here. So
oh.
uh, this is
I'll just stop you a second before we
yes.
dive into the sword because I have a couple of comments I want to catch
Oh
up
sure, yeah,
on
yeah.
before we move on to the sword.
Please go ahead.
So one is again by Irish medieval history relating to the issues I think of importing and like cross-continental communication. So it's a very interesting point that does need more investigation. And yeah, and apparently we do have Irish Parliament bringing in trade laws with Florence. So you already mentioned Venice as well. That
Mhm.
would point to a rather refined pipeline, let's say. So it's probably a big mistake when you look at these images to infer that it's like a archaic way of fighting or equipment due to kind of just lack of
Yes,
evolution, but it's a choice and specific need, whether it's cultural or military, I suppose.
yes, and it's kind of it's very much a continuum in Irish history, at least from the mostly the 16th century on, but that a lot of continental powers who have a bone to pick with England, with Britain, will
Mm,
try to equip or even try to wage war in Ireland, because this Ireland is keeps being this constant thorn on the side of the British, and is a very it's very much this also this kink in their island
mm,
harbor, so to speak, because it's so close that if another power was to set foot in Ireland, they'd have a very good chance at that point to be able to invade the British mainland, and so at this point, with the Hundred Years' War and coming to a close, and then is there a push from these other kingdoms, those nations, to equip Irish soldiers or Irish warriors in order to make them more of an issue
mm, mm, mm.
for the British Crown, maybe, and maybe that's also how these commercial trade routes were initiated, or at least kept up. But yeah, it's a subject that's definitely worth
Yeah.
investigating more,
And
definitely.
the first thing that popped to mind when you showed the first graph, let me bring it back, but this one is, and when you were mentioning the import and the trade with Venice, is how this ribbon hilt with the S curve reminds me a lot of the
Mhm.
Schiavonesca's hilt in a sense. Uh, do you know of any kind of design influence there, or is it just potentially like uh, parallel evolution? Or
Well, I think there's probably something to be said about that. I think it's again it there's so little documentation about these things in Ireland that
mm,
it's very difficult to theorize, to come up with those ideas. But was even when you're looking at some of the earliest example of Type 19, uh, from the even the 1420s. We have one from the Alexandria. So I can probably share the picture here. Um, so from the Alexandria Armory, um, that is dated from 1420s, and they're dated to when they were captured, and so you see already this shape that is not too alien from the
Mm-mm-mm.
Irish ring hilts, maybe apart from that finger quill and the finger ring here. Um, but yeah, there's again, where this whole idea came from. Was it from commerce? Was it also from Irish mercenaries serving more and more on the continent, bring
Yeah.
back these swords with them? Yeah, we don't really know for sure. But there are also other types of sword, because we talk a lot about the ring hilts, but there's also the even the Norman lords were sometimes using different different kinds of swords and armor. So this is one that's associated with Norman families in Ireland. This is more of a kind of a almost Tudor, early Tudor looking
Mm-hmm.
arming sword. But you see those quite a lot in the late 15th, 16th century art, namely if you go to Kilkenny and St. Canice Cathedral, you'll see quite a few examples uh, decorating tombs of the Butler family, where these very wealthy Norman lords from the region, and the armor that they were very different, but it fascinatingly, again, very anachronistic to the period. So you see them dressed up even by the mid, even late 16th century in armor uh, that was used on the continent or even in Britain more than 100 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
So in those cases, it's unclear if it's because they didn't see the need to update, if those armors were more suited for them, or if it was some sort of an artistic tradition to have them portrayed this way. Again, it's not clear, but at least that's the swords that you see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, but I'm gonna. I was about
And
to show this. About
yes,
sorry,
and
go ahead.
there's one more series of comments because
Yes, yes.
they came through by the Spadone project, Nicolo. So hi, thank you for joining. And they've found holes in Zurich on two-handed sword blades, and he mentions almost in the same position, close to the tip. So you seem to have definitely struck a nerve of interest, because now he's Nicolo's suggesting that you get in touch and discuss, because there are apparently some theories and ideas and some similarities. The only holes I had seen in blades were in hunting, or so-called hunting swords, where the idea is that you put a crossbar there to not go through the animal.
Yes.
But I think the swords Nicolo's looking at or the Spadone project, are definitely not generally hunting swords. Uh, so I'm happy to be the matchmaker.
Unless you're
Hopefully,
unless you're hunting an elephant, maybe. But yeah, it would be
well, that's exactly in that case.
a bit of a overkill for boar. Although those things can be mean, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can now finally look at your sword.
Sure. So yeah, I was about to show. So this is the some people might recognize it here. I'll try to show it without too much of a uh, bookcase background. But this is from Albion. This is the Kern. So it was I bought this one a couple of years ago, again, because I wanted to have a ringing hilt sword. I wanted to experiment with it. And I thought, well, I'm going to buy the one from Albion because they have this great reputation. They make these swords, they're very well researched and so forth. But when I ordered it, and then I started looking more into into the sword before I got it, and comparing it to examples I knew of, and I started to have some questions about it,
Mm.
and namely mostly about the pommel. And I'll show you another. So this is an image I made to compare the sword, the current with some archaeological examples. So what I realized looking at the Albion is that it's mostly based on two two sword finds. So the Bellinasloe and Portglenone um, swords that are in Irish museums, and they kind of mix and match some elements from both of these swords. And I would say the blade is it's very well made. Some people commented that it might actually be a little bit too tapered
Mm.
because at least from the few Irish swords that are complete, we know that they had fairly even taper, very thick, and some, at least in some of the illustrations we have, and we don't know how accurate those are, but the tip even looks to be a lot wider than the forte. But anyway, this is I would say there are still some that appear to taper down. But the blade is great. But when you start to get the hilt, that's when things start to be a little bit strange for Irish ring hilts.
Mm.
And so what they seem to have done is that they took parts from both swords and modified some. So the guard is not really an Irish guard per se. It's loosely based on the idea, but it's not really replicating anything that's quite like it. It's a lot more continental, I would say, in its overall look than have this bow tie real look to it. And so it's a bit fanciful. The grip, the so we have I think only really one example of a complete grip. And interestingly, when Peter Johnson did his design for this sword, which for some reason they didn't quite follow, at least from the design I could find online. He actually before that that sword was found, he actually came up with the right design for it.
Mm.
So they came up with this straighter tubular grip, which very well might have been used on some of these swords. But they took the longest grip I think that we know of on these one-ended swords, and that's one common complaint about this sword actually, that it has this tiny grip that for me I have very much, let's say, average size hands, and it's not terrible. Uh, and I can grip it, but this is the longest one, and you can see on the belly nestle on the left side, it is quite a bit smaller, and my hand fits fairly well in a hammer grip on
Mhm.
my sword. Handshake grip not so much. So I would imagine on the left side, I would definitely start to have some issues, at least with the sword as it's currently built, because I
Mhm.
think the the biggest thing that they changed, and I don't know how much they were aware of this when they made the sword, is the pommel. So they took the the belliness low, you can see fits very well with the end product, but
Mhm.
they really beefed up the thickness. So on most of these swords, the pommels are almost vestigial. So either like on the Port Glennon, they are smaller, a little bit thicker, but they're very, very small, or they're wider and they're extremely thin. Like it's the
Mm,
belliness low, the pommel is almost as thick as the tang, really. So it's very, very small, and they're usually a little bit rounded. So the issue that everyone has when they're using most modern reproduction ring hilts is the grip, but usually the pommel, because coupled with that short grip, what it does is that it really impedes, it stops you from using a lot of wrist motion because it's very large.
hmm
It has some very sharp ridges, and so it really digs up into your hand. And it's really not much of an issue if you go with more accurate pommels like these, where your hand can move around the pommel a lot
hmm
more easily. But what it does is that it definitely brings the balance way more forward. And this is already on the Albion version. The weight is very much forward. It's a very front weighted sword. It's also a very light sword. It's below, it's in the 900 grams range. Can't remember the exact weight here, but this is a typical, again, of Irish swords, which
hmm
are very light for the period. And but yeah, again, very forward weighted. And if you're a smith that's used to make medieval swords, suddenly for you it doesn't make any sense. You're thinking,
hmm
well, there must be something wrong. I'm gonna put a bigger pommel on this thing because the balance is all wrong. But no, this is how they design those swords,
Yeah.
for that their own use.
And
So yeah,
I think, sorry, the image you shared here before really
yeah,
shows the vestigial pommel in all its glory. It's essentially a pommelless sword. It's
almost,
just
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's the
Uh,
idea of a pommel.
mm, mm, mm. And
But there's some thicker ones also, but it's never
mm,
quite it's never quite as thick as big as you'd see on arming swords. Like even from that Alexandria armory, like it's not extremely thick as a pommel, but it's definitely quite a bit thicker
mm, mm, mm.
than what you see on the ring hilt here. Um, and
And
again,
when
sure,
you
go
look
ahead.
at these swords, sorry, from the perspective of a practitioner, because you also, of course, you don't just study swords, but you practice combat and training. So, do you feel have you let's say have you had the chance to uh, hold or practice something that is instead accurate rebuild or feels the correct way as a true Irish sword would?
Not yet, no.
Mm.
I'm looking into. I'm kind of torn right now. I want to either have commit the sin of having somebody modify my Albion, which I think, again, this is, I'm sounding very harsh towards Albion right now, but they it's they make wonderful swords, and as I say, the blade is great, and it's extremely well built. It's just not quite what I would want as far as an accurate
Mm.
depiction of an Irish ring hilt. I've seen, I think, two different swords that appear to be accurately made. One of them was done by Danelli. Um, a couple years ago. It's custom made sword, and it's based actually on. I tried to present. So I've got this actually this other image from
Yes.
that's a this is from Chouinard. So uh, some might be familiar with this auction house in Italy. Um, so this sword it's as far as we know, it's the only sword that's in private hands. It was sold in 2014, and I actually saw it pop up when the sword was put on sale, and I I think I don't know if I was the first one to flag it,
Mm.
but it definitely popped. I didn't flag it until after the end of the sale, though. Uh, but I at the time anyway, I really didn't have the money for it. But
Mm.
it's sold at, for what it is, at a ridiculous price. It's sold for 1,100 euros.
Mm.
For the only complete Irish sword, even with the only one that has a, well, not necessarily complete, but at least has the wooden core on the
Yeah.
grip still there. It's a ridiculous price, and it's a different subtype of Irish ring hilt. It has this more kind of hexagonal
Mm.
ring, which is usually a little bit, again, a little bit thicker, but also fairly small. Uh, but the grip here, again, it's the only one, complete one we know of. This is the sword that I think Danelli replicated. And we have this very non-tapering blade. Almost looks, and I don't know if it's a visual kind of trick, but almost look like even the foible is almost larger than that forte here. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, this is one of the accurate replicas, and I think there's also the Castle Keep and the Isle of Skye that does also a ring hilt that I haven't wielded it, but looks to be accurately
Mm.
replicated. So these are the two there. Most makers I've seen, commercial makers I've seen, have different issues, but I think a lot of them base their swords on the idea of what Albion made of it, and they all have they all have the issue of the pommel being
Mm.
way too big for what it should be, and even sometimes the weight of the sword is out there, or they really increase the length of the grip to make up for the handling issues. So yeah, there's not a lot of options, but yeah, I'm I'm torn as to do I want to have this modified, or do I want to pay a lot of money again to have something else made? So anyway, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a few questions on the grip, but first, again, Nicolas from the Spadone project has a question on if we have clear images of marks on the blade besides the Alexandria specimens.
So we have clear image, well, clearish image, I guess, of like some of the ones you were showing previously. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if it was the River
This one, right?
Stock one.
I see
Yeah.
a cross here.
So this is probably some of the clearest we have, of the markings. I think there are some more, but they're fairly typical of what you see on Type 19. I don't think there's much to really identify a maker on any of
Mm.
these. And as most of them, well, yeah, almost all of them are archaeological finds, the remains of the markings are fairly worn out and gone. Um, but yeah, that's what you usually get. And there might be some uh, better renditions of those markings out there. But yeah, that's mostly what we can find. Let me see if there's yeah, there,
So
and
Nicolas
again,
adds
very very
here,
typical. Yeah.
you might know the top one, but we should enlarge the pic. So,
Yes.
so yeah, looking forward to to your knowledge sharing between you two, and maybe some mark gets identified. That would be super cool.
That'd be great. Yeah. Um, and so there's also another type of sword which I've touched upon very briefly earlier in the presentation, but it's the skein. So this is the book I was showing earlier on
Hmm.
by Robert Gresh is so this one, the skein. You should can actually find online. Very, very good reference book on these on these weapons. Again, there's most of these examples are archaeological. They're found in in Irish museums, but there is, as the ring hilts, there is one example that popped up in a private sale years ago that I
Mm.
also found, and then Robert, I think, also uh, uh, noticed. And I think Robert knows, I think, the owner of both that that sword and the skin, and I think was able to examine them. But
Mhm.
I'll show a picture here of the complete one. Um, just share it here again. So, so
Oh wow, with scabbard and everything.
yes, and just like
Beautiful.
the Irish sword before, so this was sold as a I think it was sold in a collection of um,
Mm.
uh, Scottish dirks, and it was identified as such. But when I saw it, I instantly recognized it because there are some archaeological examples that have very similar the spiraled grips like this one, and also a telling aspect is uh, the relative absence of guard, or at least hand stop
Mm-mm.
on these. And so you see those swords, a lot of illustrations of kerns. They're again, interestingly, there weren't, a little bit like the gauntlet before. There weren't these very long straps that go around their necks, and sometimes they're shown with the scabbard and hanging by their legs,
Mhm.
sometimes on the belt as well. So there's, I'm not sure if there were different ways of wearing them, or if one of them was more accurate than the other. We see, we definitely see this in a 17th century portrait of Neil O'Neill, and we see him wearing his own skin, and we see one of his current in the background also wearing it. But so there's and Robert did a great analysis of most of these examples. Um, is one of his conclusion about the use of them is that they were mostly used for thrusting, and he makes parallels to rondel daggers, ballock
Mhm.
daggers from the continent, that were they were used for armored fighting and so forth. And that's where I kind of disagree with his reading on this. Um, I do think they would have probably been used for stabbing, and we do see this mentioned in the few sources we have, and even in illustrations. But I think there's a few issues with that argument, that idea. First off, I think that if we look back at the way that um, warfare was conducted and the equipment worn, yes, gallo glasses would have worn armor, and pointy daggers would have been useful, at least for the parts of the body that were armored. But these being carried mostly by Kern that were not wearing armor, and we're probably carrying them on a more regular basis. I would say maybe like trusting still useful,
Mhm.
but I think the cunning aspect, which doesn't seem um, as obvious when you look at those very pointy blades, is also an aspect that's worth considering. And this is let's say, on a medium-sized one. You have some of them that are shorter, but you have some of them that are way longer than this, that
Mhm.
are almost in the like short sword hanger
Yeah.
I mentioned. And there's also ideas that these were carried in lieu of swords by people that couldn't or wanted to wear something maybe lighter around with them. We don't know, but also an important aspect, I think, is the absence of a guard, a hand stop. If you're going to be trusting with these, there's ways to do it, and there's one illustration actually of Kearns using such a dagger to trust with. Um, and I'll try to find it back, but this is mainly using what appears to be the index finger to stop um, to stop the blade, I guess, from sliding up on hand as you're stabbing. But the the problem I have with that is if you're designing a blade that's really mainly made to be used for trusting, then why not put a hand stop there? To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's this issue as well. I think there's one thing that actually was illustrated very well in Robert's book and wasn't quite illustrated as much before that. But one big feature of the skin is the grip on these. Most of these examples is made in an apple seed shape. So they're usually, not always, but mostly they have this single edge, and the grip is not going to be round. It's not going to be symmetrical. It's usually going to be pointy towards the edge. So to me, that indicates that the user, when they're grabbing the skin, they instantly want to be able to orient the cutting edge towards the front. So there's this very much, and I would say these were probably used for cutting, and this is not the only example of a very pointy knife or long knife that's used for cutting. We have the Khyber knife as well in Afghanistan and around the the Pakistan region that also is very, very pointy, and you would think very much trusting blade, but from what we're told in sources, and no, it was actually mostly used for cutting. So there's precedent for that, and there's theories as well about this knife. Is it a holdover again from earlier times, from the from the Viking knives, or is it an influence from Scottish dirks? It's difficult to say for sure, but it definitely stays in Ireland very long, and we still see it mentioned even by the 18th century. People carrying skin, maybe not exactly in the same shape, but definitely the concept is still there.
Yeah, I find that really, really interesting, especially now that you're mentioning like the apple seed section. Lots of times you have these little details in sword design or in weapon design which you kind of overlook, or you have the tendency to overlook because, oh, well, it's obvious that this is a thrusting weapon, for instance, but when you start putting it into context in that sense and saying, oh, why would they have designed it in this way, then suddenly things seem to fall in place a little better. Also, I would imagine, of course, that if it's a purely thrusting blade, why not just make it thicker and more armor piercing, right? This is more like a armchair speculation, but
well, this one, I think this example, I can't exactly remember what the blade section is, but I think on most example, the blade is quite thicker because there's only a single edge, so it's very much kind of wedge shape. mostly like a lot of what you would see in the rondo daggers of the
Hmm.
time, really, or even Japanese armor fighting daggers, really. Um, but I think this is partly is it can go both ways. It's definitely going to make a very thick, very resistant thrusting blade, but
Hmm.
it's also going to make a very thick, resistant cutting blade. So, and it really, as I sometimes say, history is never obligated to make sense to us. It's uh, they if we only look at this from our own perspective, from our own ideas and biases, uh, it doesn't mean that the people in the past share those ideas.
Hmm.
So for them, this might have been a very great cutting blade, or cut and truss blade at least. So there's this other image here.
And wait, we have
Here,
one
yeah,
more
go ahead.
comment here by Irish Medieval History on the skein. Do you think it's able to be used on full plate armor, as we have examples from 1399 to 1536 of Irish kerns successfully ambushing and killing full-plated English knights?
Probably, yeah. I think as long as you can get in the openings of these swords, and I think also it always depends on what is the fully armored, because even if you take gallows glasses, which were heavily armored, they still have many openings in their armor, namely the face, around the neck, and so yes, they are protected in many ways, but there are other aspects where they're not. And even if you're a British knight, if you're trudging through the the Irish uh, uh, the Irish land, and you're wearing your armor, you probably still have quite a few zones, and oftentimes the face that's not protected. So there are ways to use those weapons, in not necessarily to defeat armor, but to go around the armor at least. But I do think that most of these blades could have probably been used to go through mail. Again, that for me the number one issue still is the lack of a hand stop.
Hmm.
I mean, I would see it probably being used this way, but there's always a danger if you meet a very strong resistance, and this is in forensic uh, investigations. This is one thing you'll sometimes see on perpetrators of knife
Hmm.
crimes when they have knives like these, let's say, or where the hand doesn't have a stop. They'll have these injuries to their hands because the blade slid and cut them.
Hmm.
So yeah, to me, if you're really looking to make a thrusting blade, it's a good idea to have something to hold your hand. But uh, again, yeah, could be different things. And did the Kerns use these? Did they use their swords? Did they use something else? It's hard to say.
Okay, so yeah, you had some more images that, so we'll start with this one, I suppose.
Yeah, so that's the so that's the image I talked about earlier. So you see on the right side, uh, this is actually the image that Robert used for his cover. So this is another famous image, drown after the quick, drown in the moment, basically.
Hmm.
So this is an image of different kerns, again, probably mercenaries, and they're all showing off their ring hilt swords with very different hilts than what we find. This might be fanciful, or maybe this was some sort of regional variation. We don't know, but you can see on the right side is something very interesting going on. So there's a little bit of a fight going on. The guy on the right has his skin, and as I was saying, he's holding it with the index finger on the pommel. And interestingly, when I learned Irish stick fighting, my teacher also showed me a few tricks with the knife that he knew, and he was saying, if you have this knife that you want to use in a fight, and you're worried about the hand slipping, he says, what you got to do is put the pommel of the knife right in the middle of your palm,
Mm.
or you put your finger on the top if you're holding it reverse. So, like, was that a continuation or just a parallel idea? I don't know, but uh, it's definitely, I'd say, the way to use it safely if you're going to thrust with it. And the guy defending has this gauntlet that I mentioned before on his left arm here, trying to use it to parry the thrust, and has his sword at the ready at the back. And that's one of those images I mentioned also where you
Mhm.
can see the forte is just ridiculously expanded, or the foible is ridiculously expanded
Mm-mm-mm.
on these swords. And we haven't really found any swords like this. I don't know if this is kind of a cartoonish way to represent them, or to give the idea that those swords are very forward heavy, or if there were actually swords made this way. We don't know, but yeah, this is one of those representations.
It's really interesting, yeah, that flaring out. I mean, considering the forward weight and the way of use, it it would not be crazy to think that they would. The one of the variations would be a flared out tip, a little.
Yeah, maybe if they
Yeah,
could get their hands on those. I don't know if there were many
yeah,
European makers
exactly.
making those at that time, but who knows?
Really interesting.
Maybe the Irish special sending them out.
Yes.
Uh, and the next picture is also interesting
Yes.
for the skin. Also a close up, but this portrait is interesting in so many ways. It's and it kind of connects as well to the next part about Irish sword. But this is Neil O'Neill. This is a painting that was made in the 1670s, if I remember right. But this is very affluent Irish lord. This painting made of him, and wearing very uh, like at least an idea, very traditional Irish dress,
Hmm.
at least for the 17th century. And he has, of course, he's all adorned here. He's got his dart. One aspect that I'm gonna cover right now, because I'm sure people will jump on this, but yes, he has Japanese armor lying on the left side, and actually the Kern at the back is carrying the kabuto in his hands. And there's been
Oh.
so much. So I think that this is really the main attraction of this portrait, is why is that thing there? And there's been wild theories about this. Nobody really knows for sure why it's there. There's again many ideas. One of them is, well, maybe he's just showing off. He's got this armor somewhere, and it's rare, and very few people have those. Some kings in Europe were giving those some of those armors in the
Hmm.
16th century, 17th century, and having one of those is kind of a status symbol, I guess. There's also the idea that maybe he's portraying himself as a defender of Christianity, and at that time period, the Japanese are very much they're very much repressing and
Hmm.
even um, they're even executing, torturing Christians in Japan. And so, is this showing the armor there as if it's like the armor of a defeated enemy? Is that to show the idea? I'm not sure that
Interesting.
really a lot of Europeans at the time in Ireland would have known that, like this is a Japanese armor, and that it's like this symbol of defending
Yeah.
Christianity, but who knows?
Also, the current carrying the helmet, I don't know, the function of carrying the helmet feels not completely to sync with the defeated enemy. It feels more like
Yeah, it's
you
almost more
probably
like
have it on the
you're.
floor as,
Yeah,
yeah,
it almost more look like a here, my lord. You know, I'm
yeah, something like that,
retainer.
exactly.
I'm holding your helmet while you throw this dart.
What I
Um,
find really interesting about the Japanese connection here is 17th century, you start seeing a lot of still lives in the Netherlands, especially, or Flemish
mhm.
painters with Japanese swords or parts of armor, if I'm not mistaken, but swords for sure.
Yes.
And they were one of the few powers that were able to trade with Japan. Uh, it's interesting though to see it in an Irish portrait. That's
Yes.
definitely um, unusual for sure.
Yes.
Oh, and here we have a comment, two comments by Irish Medieval History on the matter. Oh no, sorry, this one we already saw. This one, that Pacific Japanese armor is believed to be from a Japanese Christian family, and it may have been a gift from the Dutch trade. Oh, okay, so exactly what we were talking about. The options, kind of, yeah, through the Dutch. That would make sense.
Yes.
There's the
Yep.
Christian connection as well.
Yeah.
Still though,
That's probably. I think that's probably my idea that this is,
mm,
that it's a gift he wants to show off that, I've got this insanely exotic armor that I
yeah,
acquired, that was given to me, and yeah.
which would also say a lot about curiosity of the viewer, I think, because we tend to think that a lot of these elements in these paintings tend to be symbols that people need to immediately recognize. But as you say, I don't know how many people would have been able to like symbolically place a Japanese breastplate or armor in and even understand what it is. This could
Hmm.
simply be a fantasy, a
Yeah,
variation of Valentica or something like that.
and it's also also it's a great conversation piece. If you want, usually these portraits were used to, advertise
Mm-mm.
yourself, and in the courts, and people will be, oh, what is this strange armor that he has there? And then, oh, don't you know, this is an armor from Japan.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was definitely have some people talk about him, which was probably also the goal of all of this. Um, and some more details about this image of the uh, or uh, oh, seems like I've shared too many images. I have to remove some. Let's see if that's gonna work now. Okay.
I think I see it uploading. Yes. There we go.
So anyway, this is a close-up. I think it's Robert included this one in his blog, talking about the portrait. But we can see the skin on the belt here. So with a very decorated grip, uh, like showing this figure um, uh, carved in. Um, and the current also has his own skin in his belt, which is a lot more plainer, but still very detailed. And talking quickly about the current too, one thing I, I discovered when I first examined detailed um, pieces from this portrait is that he's actually
Oh, wait,
carrying.
wait. Is yeah, I have the image here with the comparison between the portrait and the photo.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, okay. Just
Yeah, no, that's the right one. But
okay, checking.
just quickly talking about it, but could maybe share it later on if we have time. But he's carrying an axe on his left side, so on a frog in his belt, which is a detail that was not highlighted beforehand,
Mm.
and it shows again the use of the axe being a lot later than most people would have expected, and especially with the currents that are not usually associated with the axe, but I think we're probably more so than we tend to believe. But anyway, that there's another detail here that leads to my next part. But you can also see probably the basket hilt at the
Yes, I wanted to
yes.
mention that.
So yeah, this is another big change in Irish sword history. So 17th century, there's a massive push now by the British Crown to repress the Gaelic warrior culture, warrior groups. So they're sending them by droves in Europe to fight on the continent, possibly to get killed there and not come back. There's a wave also of confiscation of swords, weapons, and also of deforestation to try and drive a lot of these people to become farmers and uh, to quit their warring ways. Um, and so the ring hills kind of disappear, and now there's adoptions from much more British, Scottish. So basket hilts are popularly associated with Scotland, but this only really becomes true by the mid to late 18th century. Before that, it's very much a British thing, as much Scottish as it is English, really. And and so we have I got, for example, here. There's one I have. Just take it out of my display. Here we go. Got this. So this
Yeah,
horseman, I believe from the 1730s, 40s.
this one's
Um, so
beautiful.
this is very much a type of sword that would have been carried at the time by British forces, and fairly similar as well to what have been carried by in the late 17th century as well. Um, and so yeah, you have these swords being adopted. They're sometimes some of them are called Irish hilts, Irish types. They're not necessarily uniquely Irish. The term we believe mostly comes from the fact that British people couldn't be bothered to differentiate Scottish and Irish people,
Mm.
and so a lot of Scottish, especially Highland Scottish, would be called Irish by British authors. Um, but there's definitely this start to of carrying more British and even more continental swords in some ways. So just a few years after a decade or so after this portrait was made. So there's of course the Williamite War. So uh, uh, William of Orange comes in, defeats the Gaelic British king, and then goes on to also defeat the Irish uh, Jacobites. And this also made a big change in the Irish sword culture, being that
Mm.
suddenly uh, you have after the wars, you have the penal laws coming to effect, and there were already quite a few movement to confiscate swords in Ireland, but then you have these laws putting in effect that the Catholic majority is not allowed to own weapons anymore, and so this included swords, although it's debatable how much they cared about sword at this point, and if they
Mm.
really cared about firearms. But there were some provisions in the law about uh, Gaelic Celtic aristocracy being allowed to still own and carry a certain amount of weapons, including swords, and also there were provisions for Irish Catholics to go and serve in continental armies with the famous wild geese, they came to be called. And so you have some like adoptions of different kinds of swords, and with the Gaelic nobility, there's the small sword that becomes very
Mhm.
very popular. And so you have this again this separation, a bit like we see with through the Anglo-Norman invasions, different groups of people using different kinds of weapons. And one of my beliefs is that so you have the Gaelic aristocracy going towards more the continental small sword, and then you have the Protestant military man going towards more the British kind of
Hmm.
swordplay sword, and then you have the rural working class uh, keeping up probably some of the older ways, and fighting mostly with shillelaghs, maybe as a um, uh, as a continuation of the axe fighting techniques in a way. Um, so you have this fork where these three currents are kind of evolving on their
Hmm.
own. Uh, so and I have another type of Irish sword right here that illustrates this well. So this is a Celtic hilt.
Oh.
Some people here might know about this. It's a very rare type of Napoleonic era saber. So we call it the Celtic hilt. We don't know necessarily how it's called in the period, but this was carried by mostly Irish horse regiments, and namely the Enniskillen Dragoons, and also the some of the Scott Greys were known officers were known to carry these. So they're non-regulation swords. I think
Hmm.
there's less than 30 examples known in the world right now, and this this one has its original hilt letter liner on it still.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and it's known like this because it's got this obviously these like Celtic designs on the hilt,
Hmm.
which some people believe might so this hilt might have been the inspiration from the 1821 heavy cavalry pattern, and it's got of course this very
Yes,
impressive
impressive.
pipe back blade on it. Surprisingly light, surprisingly maneuverable. But this is this really uh, really captures kind of the late period of Irish swords where you have this mix of now like saber, uh, like very protective British
Hmm.
hilts, uh, but also the uh, a renaissance of sorts of the Irish Gaelic designs, art in in the design of the sword. Um, so yeah, this one I bought from this gentleman who not too far from here actually had this collection from his father was looking to sell, and his dad served in World War II, was responsible for the entertainment of troops, Canadian troops
Hmm.
stationed in the UK, and he probably bought this lot from his time in London and had them in his cabin um, for quite a time. And they were all, you can see, but the edge is very much nicked.
Yeah.
And as I usually tell people, a lot of people would say, "Oh, this is battle damage." Um, it really is, because once a battle would be over, you would rarely go back, put this in your scabbard, and be like, "All right, war is done. I'll just hang this on my wall." No, you would probably the first thing you would do is probably go see somebody with a sharpening wheel and tell them, "Could you just repair that,
Yeah.
please?" Because this is very dangerous for creating weaknesses in your blade and just detrimental to cutting, really. But this is one of the the better swords actually from this collection. Some of them look like they could I could saw a tree with them.
Mm.
And I think what happened is probably his dad invited some friends over at his cabin sometimes and had maybe a few too many whiskey and decided, hey, let's play Zorro. And
Yeah, I would not be surprised.
yes. So anyway,
Sadly, but
it survived this. I don't know
Yeah.
if it was worse than Waterloo, but it was definitely definitely scaring for that sword. So yeah, so there's tons more really to talk about Irish swords, Irish warfare. It's a fascinating part of sword history, even military history, Irish history, and the topic of Irish sword. Even in Ireland, it's surprising how little there is studies around these swords, and I
Mm.
think there's been some great stuff done in the past. Namely in the 80s, there was a very good thesis on the evolution of medieval Irish swords. But I think it's um, it's time also to review some of the ideas
Mm.
that were held, and yeah, and I think uh, also there's very few of these swords, and I think a lot of people don't know about them because well, they're not very common, but also they're
Mhm.
as I was saying earlier on, they expect them to be very similar to what was done in Europe. But then when you learn more about them, you learn how unique and interesting and they are. So yeah, it was it was really became one of my passions, and I'm really glad I did. So yeah, one little funny story that's unrelated to that segment I was doing, but that I often want to share about these swords is that there's very few of them. Most of them are in museums right now, and they were archaeological finds, but
Mhm.
not all of them were found in archaeological settings, or at least not by the people who brought them to museums. There's one sword in particular which is described in one of the journal articles as the way it was found is that this scholar was a army officer, I think, was at this uh, garage one day and saw these guys working on a car, and they were trying to remove a tire, and they one of them was attempting to do it with this tool, and then the man instantly recognized what it was. It was an Irish ring hilt. And so I don't know how it went, but like decided to stop the man. The sword was it was broken, was split, but uh, it was probably wrestled from the man's hand instantly before it broke further down. But yeah, you never know where you're gonna find these.
Yeah.
Uh, I myself, I think the sword, some of the most interesting finds I made. I bought this sword one day from a garbage man,
Mm.
garbage collector who was put it online for sale. It was this 18th century Ottoman shamshir, and he said he found it doing his rounds. When this guy came up to his truck one morning and with the sword and said, "Just want to get rid of this sword. Can I just put it in the trash?" And thankfully, the garbage man said, "I'll take it for you, sir."
Yeah.
Yeah, or anyway, it's crazy sometimes what people don't
Yeah.
know what they have.
Yeah, occasionally you'll hear of some painting masterpieces hanging in a kitchen
Yeah.
in the middle of cooking fumes and stuff, and it's like, okay.
Well, the one of the first job I had as a curator was working in the Morin Center in Quebec City,
Mhm.
and was helping with the restoration of the place. And if you ever visit Quebec City, definitely suggest you stop there. It's a wonderful historic site, very beautiful one, and it's also one of the first public jail in Quebec City. It's built in 1808,
Mm.
and they um, preserved one part of this prison. And when they were doing the restoration, they were taking out the floorboards, and they were really, the workers were bringing us tons and tons of buckets of just the accumulation of dirt and soil underneath these floorboards. And at some point, they came to me and said, "Hey, we found this file." And I thought, "Wow, okay, a file in prison. Okay, that's very very stereotypical."
Yeah.
But then they bring it to me, and it was fairly rusted, of course. But I look at it and I say, that's not a file. That's a sword blade. And it was broken down, but it was a early late 16th century rapier blade. And
Wow.
we brought it to the conservation lab, and they were able to highlight it was the name Sagum in on the
Hmm.
blade, but probably not one of these later hack pieces saying Sagum, whatever. But
Hmm.
this was, I think, probably more either uh, the real deal, or at least very close to it. And they did some traceology, and they said that it was broken, but it was visibly used as a tool for quite some time. So how did it end up there? Was a prisoner using it as a tool to escape, or as a, you know, stab other prisoners with? We don't know, but yeah, again, never know
And the
where
prison
you're gonna
is
find
dates
those.
to 1808, right?
Yes, and it
You
was
said.
active until 1864, is when they closed it
Yeah.
down and
So I
turned it into
mean,
college.
that blade still has a few centuries, a
Yeah,
significant amount of life before it even was used for its final purpose, which is really interesting.
yeah.
Um, Before I let you go and take too much of your time, and while we wait and see if there are any final questions from who's watching, one point that maybe we should keep for another talk, but is the obvious comparison, I think, that even pops out in some of the literature between these Irish ring swords and their forward heavy kind of vibe, and even just the shape of the blade, and the cascara
Mm.
with its like very light pommel, and again, very, if at all, tapering blade. Do you think there's some learning that could be made given the similarities to kind of try and rebuild, let's say, the use of the Irish sword through what we know, let's say, of the use of the cascara, which is a little more recent?
I very much think so. Yes, I think it's also Robert did this article on it on his
Yes, it
blog, and
was in.
I think having handled a few Cascara, I would say uh, there's there is difference though in the now the blade is built. They're quite a lot thicker generally in the foible, so they are, I think, probably even more forward weighted than a lot of Irish ring hilts would have been, and they're, I think, quite a lot heavier as well,
Mhm.
generally. But there might be better examples out there, but surely be better examples out there that I haven't handled. But yeah, that's a good point. It's one that I've been very much interested in looking at the African continent, where there's a lot of uh, very interesting fighting traditions and practices there that I think are deserve more attention, that have been ignored because they're not European, and people are like,
Mhm.
oh, this is too far removed, and uh, but I think this is that's irrelevant, and that's there's always parallel um, developments in fighting cultures. And like I was talking earlier on about the Zulus, I think there's similarities there with Astartes, with well, the Kerns might have fought with their weapons, and even with the Takuba as well, with
Mhm.
the sorry, the Tuareg um,
Yes.
people in North Africa. I think there's uh, comparisons to be made there, and the way it's used, especially in like the crouching, using the shield very low to the ground to protect you. Um, might have been something that we see back then, um, or even the guards used. Yeah, there's lots of stuff I think that could be learned from looking at these other traditions, at least
Mhm.
um, because the European chroniclers of the time definitely, at least one or two of them, definitely noted when they were talking about how the Irish fought that they did not, uh, and very kind of very um, elitist way to describe it, but they were saying they don't know fencing. They only
Mhm.
use their swords to cut, and they're not they 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 don't use their swords as you would see in Britain or Europe. Basically, meaning they don't know fencing because they don't trust with their sword.
Yeah.
They're not using them like you would a rapier, which makes sense. It's not a rapier, but that it means to me that they use their swords in a completely different way. It was habitually done in Europe in the 16th, 17th century. So yeah, there's I think there's interesting studies and questions to be asked. Yeah,
Cool. Okay, we have two last comments. So one is going back to the blade you found in the prison that Holdsey mentions it probably wouldn't be uncommon as musketeers were more rare in early colonies. So let's say a rapier blade would perhaps not be surprising. And continues with it would be interesting to know who owned the property beforehand or what was there before the jail happened to become a jail
hmm
or a prison.
yeah.
And then oh sorry.
No, sorry, there was before that was a French fortification, but it was completely raised. And the thing is also that the sword was not found in the soil. There's actually a basement underneath that jail cell. It was really found in the floors, uh,
Mm,
and a surprising amount of stuff. But everything in underneath that floor is from the period of the prison, military buttons, coins, and some newspaper remains, and so it, I don't think it would have been brought in from a previous um, use of the building. At least it would have been people would have noticed that, hey, why are you putting this sword blade under
mm,
the floorboards, Jim? Oh, sorry.
mm.
So yeah, that must have been put there later on. I would think, but by whom? That's yeah, we don't really know.
Okay, really interesting. And then we have okay, thank you, Irish Medieval History. Very interesting talk. So thank you, Maxime,
Thank you.
for your interpretation time and for hosting the chat today, me. So anyway, I think on that note, thank you, Maxime, from my part as well. It was really, really interesting. Uh, we might have more to talk about Irish swords because I feel like we haven't really we've
Absolutely, yeah.
scratched the surface.
And like I
And
said,
from what
my main thing is mostly well, the main thing I'm known for is usually around swords is French swords. So
yeah,
also that to
in
talk
fact,
about.
that was
But
actually
yeah,
the first reason I had contacted you
yes,
was that. But then you suggested Irish swords, and I was like, okay, absolutely,
yeah.
that has to be the topic. And yeah, hopefully with the Spadone project and Nicolo, hopefully does its small part, this chat, to bring a little bit of awareness towards Irish swords and the field of research where there's still a lot I understand that can be discovered and done. So
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, hopefully this is a small contribution to getting people interested. So thank you again, Maxime, and thank you everyone for watching. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.